Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, now that the draft is officially in the rearview mirror, want to take a few days to highlight a player or two here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. And today, going to take a look at third-round pick, Alabama defensive tackle Byron Young. Plus, we got some news and notes from around the league and your calls and texts to close out the show. It's all coming up on a pretty busy Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it drops. If you're checking us out on YouTube, you know it's because of my guy, Ari. So, one, we appreciate you checking us out on YouTube, but two, we appreciate Ari for making sure we're up there, we're looking good, we're sounding good. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. And many thanks to Raider Nation for help growing the page as quickly as it has grown since Ari's taken over. Make sure that we're up there each and every day. Got a lot to get to, news and notes, but before we do that, I do want to let you know today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And I'll tell you right now, glad to be here on the podcast with you on this Tuesday edition of the show, following a not-so-good radio show that I did on Monday, at least up to my standards, right? I felt like I could have done a lot better. I don't know. It just wasn't clicking. Sometimes you're just not there, right? It's like you're in the batter's box, but you're not making 100% contact on the ball. I don't know what it was, but something happened, but it doesn't matter. I mean, hey, look, you're as good as your last show, so hopefully this show will be a lot better. And then, of course, the radio show's a lot better the rest of the week. But news and notes to get to, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. And now that the Raiders have drafted the 9 guys that they selected, they've signed 10 guys as undrafted free agents. Now between today and mini camps and training camps and, rookie mini camps and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they get it down to 53-man roster at some point. Then they get into the regular season. You're going to see a lot of movement on the roster. And so that's what you saw on Monday, where the Raiders waived 2 guys, safety Jalen Elliott and tackle Sebastian Gutierrez. Elliott signed to the Raiders practice squad back in November, made his regular season debut back in 2021 with the Lions and played in 8 games, and then was cut in May as the Lions made room for their rookie class. So he's kind of been a victim of rookies come in, he's got to go. That happens to him more times than not. And one guy that could fill that void of Elliott is Raider safety Christopher Smith, who they drafted in the 5th round. And then also tackle Sebastian Gutierrez. He appeared in 1 game last season, and the Raiders didn't pick any offensive linemen during the draft, but they did get a couple guys that were undrafted free agents. And one of them, matter of fact, they gave some pretty good money to. So there's a good opportunity that he's going to end up playing. We'll tell you about him in just a quick second. But with the moves that the Raiders made on Monday, it actually gives them 90 of 90. They're only allowed to have 90-man roster, so cutting the 2 guys or waiving the 2 guys in Elliott and Gutierrez, and then, of course, having the 10 undrafted free agents and the 9 draft picks. Once they sign their 9 draft picks, they'll officially be at 90. So that's all they can have on their roster. Again, that's not going to stop right there. They'll have more moving and shaking before it's all said and done, before they even get to training camp. But as of right now, that's where they sit. 90 of 90 roster spots are full. I talked about undrafted free agents and offensive linemen that the Raiders signed, and Dalton Wagner out of Arkansas was one, and then McClendon Curtis out of Chattanooga was another one. But I wanted to talk about Dalton Wagner because he signed a free agent deal with the Raiders on Saturday, and he signed for a guaranteed $225,000, which made him the highest paid of the Raiders' non-drafted signees, which is pretty much a good sign that, he's going to be on the team. He started all 4 seasons at Arkansas, 6'8", 320 pounds, has prototypical size for the position in the pros. He's also a wrestler, right? He also has an NIL deal with WWE. So my man Damon on my radio show is a big fan of him already. He's an Illinois native. He allowed just 2 sacks last year, both against Alabama, and only 11 during his 4 seasons as a starter. The season saw him named first team All-SEC by Pro Football Focus. So that's Dalton Wagner, offensive tackle out of Arkansas. Again, $225,000 made him the highest paid of the Raiders' non-drafted signees. Now, I also wanted to give you a little bit of news and notes around the NFL. How about 5th-year options not picked up? One of the things that I was looking at what positions the Raiders were going to select in the draft and when they were going to select them, and we see that they didn't select a linebacker till round 6. Well, if this stat right here that I'm about to tell you is any sign of why they waited, then you'll understand. 5 linebackers were drafted in the first round in 2020. 0 teams picked up their 5th-year option. On Monday, the 5th-year option, that was the deadline, May 1st. They had to have the 5th-year option selected by then. Side note for the Silver and Black, the Raiders had nobody that was eligible for a 5th-year option because nobody from the 2020 draft class, at least the first round, are on the Raiders currently, right? You remember that was Henry Ruggs and Damon Arnett. Both guys are out of the league. But 5 linebackers selected in the first round in 2020. No 5th-year options got picked up for any of the guys. Isaiah Simmons of the Cardinals, K'Lavon Chason for the Jaguars, Kenneth Murray from the Chargers, Jordan Brooks, Seahawks, Patrick Queen, Ravens. And really, to be honest, I really liked all those linebackers coming out. I really did. Kenneth Murray, I saw him a lot at Oklahoma. Jordan Brooks, I believe he came from Texas Tech. He was a pretty good player. Patrick Queen from LSU, I really liked him. Isaiah Simmons, he was the guy that everyone talked about. I know we talked about him quite a bit here on the show, that he can do just about everything. Play linebacker, get after the quarterback, go out and play corner if he has to, go play safety. I mean, he was kind of one of those guys, a Swiss Army knife, but they said that the big knock on him was he just wasn't a master of anything. He was good at everything, but wasn't a master of anything. So that was a problem. But Isaiah Simmons actually had his best season as a pro in 2022. 94 total tackles, 4 sacks, 7 passes defense, 2 interceptions, and a defensive touchdown. And then Patrick Queen, he actually improved in coverage last year. That was one of his big downfalls that he had coming out of school. He had allowed 5 touchdowns in his first 2 years in the league. Didn't allow any touchdowns in 2022, and the passer rating allowed year by year, 2020, 104.4, 2021, 115.6, in 2022, only 83.1. Patrick Queen has a $3.9 million cap number. Now, I'm just throwing it out there because I wouldn't have any problem if GM Dave Ziegler picked up the phone and called the Ravens and said, hey, look, you already got Roquan Smith. You gave him a $100 million deal. Do you really want Patrick Queen after declining his 5th-year option? And look, just because these guys got their 5th-year option declined doesn't mean they're on their way out. Look, Josh Jacobs, we should know that very well. Josh Jacobs didn't get his 5th-year option picked up, and, well, now he's holding the franchise tag. Now, he hasn't signed it yet, but he's holding the franchise tag after having a hell of a season. So any of these guys that didn't get their option picked up, they very well might just go out and ball out for that team next year, and they could be in the same situation that the Raiders are in right now with Josh Jacobs, where they hit him with the franchise tag and then try to work out a deal. I mean, that could be just a motivating factor, if nothing else. But it's no coincidence that 5 first-round linebackers, none of them got their 5th-year option picked up. So when they say don't draft a linebacker in the first round, that's what they're talking about. That's why they're talking about don't draft a linebacker in the first round. So, you know, it sucks. The linebacker, running back, it even feels like safety, right? Just doesn't get love in the league like it used to. So those are some guys that could potentially be available. And I'd be interested in the Raiders, giving a call to the Cardinals and talking about Isaiah Simmons. And I'd be interested in the Raiders giving a call to the Ravens and being interested in Patrick Queen. If the price is right, don't do anything crazy. I mean, again, these guys are going to be free agents at the end of the year since their 5th-year options got declined. So, why give up the farm on a trade, if you're not guaranteed to have them for another year? I mean, they could just be a one-year rental, and who wants that, right? That's not worth it. So, I mean, if it's something that they're very interested in and Patrick Graham's like, I need that guy to complete my defense, sure, give him a call and see what it would take. And if you can work something out that's reasonable, great. If not, that's okay. You just go ahead and move on. Also, with that being said, I know I've seen a lot of people suggest that, well, Hunter Renfrow could be potentially part of a trade for one of those guys like Isaiah Simmons or a Patrick Queen, depending on what those teams respectfully want to do, the Cardinals or the Ravens. And I'll just throw in this side note. There has been a lot of conversation about Hunter Renfrow. I've had a lot of conversation about him and the potential of him being on the move. If a trade were to happen before June 1st, there's a dead cap hit of $7.3 million for Renfrow. After June 1st, it's only a dead cap hit of $1.8 million. So what I'm saying is, if there's going to be a trade of Renfrow, it'll be post June 1st. So right now we're looking at May 2nd. So there's got to be at least another month before Renfrow gets traded. I just can't see them taking that big of a dead cap hit for a trade. But, we'll see. So if he's involved in anything, most likely, like I said, it'd be post June 1st, and that's fine. Right? What are they going through right now? Just, just voluntary mini camps and everything. It's not really a big deal. They don't even have to be present for that. It's just voluntary. So I can see if they were to make a move, not that I'm trying to push Hunter Renfrow out of there. Like Hunter Renfrow a lot. He was injured in 2022, so none of us really got to see what he can do in a Josh McDaniels offense. It all depends on what the guys upstairs and what Josh McDaniels thinks. Is he a guy that they feel like they can move forward with? Is he going to be healthy this upcoming year? Or is it worth taking a shot at trading him and bringing in someone else that maybe could potentially help out the defense? Again, those are the answers that Dave Ziegler has to come up with. Those are the answers that Champ Kelly has to come up with. Josh McDaniels, Patrick Graham, not Q. Not Q. I'm just throwing it out there that if it's going to happen, my opinion, it'll happen after June 1st. But that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Little news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, going to have a highlight on defensive tackle Byron Young, the third-round draft pick out of Alabama. He's a guy that I'm pretty high on. I'll tell you why. You'll hear from a few of his sound bites from his press conference that he had on Saturday after he was, or actually on Friday night after he was selected by the Silver and Black. That all come up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And I don't know if you're watching the NBA playoffs, but I am all locked in. Right now, you need to make a fast break to FanDuel for the NBA playoffs. And right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And there's all kind of prop bets that you could bet on. There's all kind of parlays that you can do. Everything NBA related, they've got you covered there at FanDuel. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to highlight a player here in defensive tackle Byron Young out of Alabama, the third-round pick. Matter of fact, the Raiders selected him number 70 overall in the third round on Friday. And what I'm going to do is over the next few days, I'm going to highlight a player or two. Sometimes it'll be an interview with someone who covered the player. Maybe it's a Locked On guy. Maybe it's someone from outside. And sometimes it'll just be my thoughts on that person and what I think that they bring to the table. And I wanted to start off with Byron Young because I'm excited about him. Tyree Wilson, I talked a lot about him on Friday. Obviously had an opportunity to talk to him Thursday right after he got drafted. Talked to him on Wednesday in Kansas City before he got drafted. So I feel like I've talked about Tyree Wilson a lot. And of course, we'll talk about him a lot more moving forward anyway, but really wanted to highlight Byron Young. I have a lot of high expectations for him. He seems like he's going to be that guy that's not only going to be a really good player, but also a vocal leader on the field that the Raiders really needed. There's so many guys that the Raiders have in the locker room, and this is not a bad thing, but they have so many guys in the locker room that are lead by example. Like, oh, I'm kind of a quiet guy, but, I just kind of let my play do the leading. Well, sometimes you need a vocal leader as well. You need to have a guy that's going to speak up and say what he's got to say. And, Josh Jacobs has that to him as well, and I really like that. But I just think Byron Young is going to be a good player for the Raiders. And it's funny, I had a guy on my radio show on Monday, Justin Mello from the Draft Network, and he was on talking about Byron Young, and he's like, man, Q, I just think this dude is going to be a solid NFL player for like 10, 12 years. You're going to look up 10, 12 years from now, he's still going to be in the league just doing what he does, right? Just an old wily veteran. And I do expect some really good things from him. I do expect to see him out there on the field quite a bit. And I think he's going to be pushing Matthew Butler and Neil Farrell Jr., who were rookies last year, for playing time. I think he's really going to push them in practice, and that's a good thing. He's gone to Alabama. They always have the biggest competition in practice, and that's where games are won, in my opinion. You win games on Sunday, Monday through Friday during the practice week. The way you practice is the way you're going to play on Sundays, on Mondays, on Thursdays, whatever the case may be. And Byron Young just seems like he's going to be one of those guys that are going to get after it in practice all the time and really push these other dudes to be even better. And that's what I like from players, is guys that are going to go full throttle basically all the time. But he's a good player on the field. But one of the things that stood out to me is the fact that he's talking about, before he got drafted, he said, hey, whoever selects me is going to get a winner. They're going to get a leader. They're going to get a guy that can change the culture. If their locker room needs to change the culture, they're just going to get that guy. So when we were on the Zoom call with him on Friday night, I asked him about that. I was like, where does that mentality come from? Where did you get that from? And again, it's something I think that the Raiders need. But here's Byron Young talking about his leadership and that winning mentality that he's going to bring to the Silver and Black.
I think the mentality really comes from, how my parents raised me. My parents always raised me to be a winner. And then when I got to Alabama, that's something that we always harped on too. And so I haven't lost many games in my career. And, I would love if I can go in and help that culture get to, the same, just really help improve the culture and continue to go in there and impact everybody in a positive way. And, like you asked, you said, I think they'll be getting a great player, but also a player who can, transition into becoming a leader, because they already have a lot of great guys on the team, like Chandler Jones, Max Crosby. They drafted Tyree earlier tonight. So it's going to be a deep group of guys up there, man. But I just want to come in. I want to impact it right away, and I just want to, give them everything I can.
So I thought that was a really good answer. And again, I feel like that's that leadership that is needed for the Raiders. And I don't think that they've had that guy on the field that's going to be vocal. There's a lot of guys that are talented dudes that are just going to go and get after it. And I think they just need to have that one dude. And I feel like Byron Young is going to be that guy. And already in a locker room with the Max Crosby, with the Chandler Jones, with the Josh Jacobs, with the Devontae Adams, even though those guys are on the offensive side of things, but with the defensive players that, got some big names like a Crosby and a Chandler Jones, I think it's just going to help to have another dude like them in that locker room and just playing it from a different position. A guy that, is really good at stopping the run, takes a ton of pride in stopping the run. And even in 2022, if you go back and look, had some good production getting after the quarterback as well. Also, he was a guy who participated in the Senior Bowl. He was a guy that Patrick Graham was able to get up close and personal with, and other coaches from the Raiders staff were able to get up close and personal with. And if you look at the guys that the Raiders selected in the draft, like 4 or 5 of them came out of the Senior Bowl. Even a couple guys that were undrafted free agents came from the Senior Bowl. So they definitely took advantage. I remember tweeting that out during the draft that the Raiders had taken advantage of the Senior Bowl experience that they had. And I had one guy question me and say, is that taking advantage or is it a crutch? And I was like, no, it's just they're familiar with the guy. They got to coach him up and really get to know him in Mobile, Alabama. There's nothing wrong with that, right? They're taking advantage of the opportunity. I think every team across the league is going to want to have their coaches on hand to be, the coaches of those respective teams there in Mobile, because that showcase really highlights some of these players. So one of the things that Young has is experience. He played over 50 games at Alabama. So, again, another question that I asked him was how that 50-plus games that he played, how that helped shape him into the winner and the leader that he is today.
Yeah, I think it helped me a lot. I was able to play a lot of football. I played in every game, while I was at Alabama. So I think I played like 54 consecutive games. And, that's something I took pride in. There were games where I had little nicks and bruises that I could have set out for, and I probably shouldn't have played. But for me, I'm a guy who loves playing football. So I'm going to go out there whether or not I'm hurt, whether if I'm 100% or if I'm 60. If I feel like, I can go help the team, then I'm going to go out there and play. But, being around guys like Will Anderson, Bryce Young, Christian Barmore, all kind of guys that I was around for so many years, I think that helped me grow. And I was able to watch those guys and how they led. And that really helped me in my leadership role. And then it helped me off the field, just seeing how they carry themselves and things like that. So, being around Alabama and all the players that come to Alabama, it was just a great experience.
So experience matters, right? I mean, all the talk that we had about Anthony Richardson, and I know it's a different position at the quarterback position, but he only had 13 career starts for Florida. We're talking about Byron Young, over 50 career games that he played in with Alabama. And of course, we all know the winning pedigree of Alabama. So not only did he play in a lot of games, he played in a lot of meaningful games. And I think that goes somewhere. Yeah, that's a big deal. So when you get down on a drive where you have to go 98 yards, Byron Young is going to be disciplined enough not to have a stupid penalty that's going to keep a drive alive, right? Because he's been there, done that when the lights are the brightest and when it's come down to crunch time and you've got to be on point and you've got to hold your water. He's going to know about that because he's already been there, done that in games that are very, very meaningful at Alabama. So, again, another reason why I like him, as we're highlighting Byron Young, the defensive tackle out of Alabama, a guy who not only can play the defensive tackle role, but also can slide up and down the line of scrimmage, which is definitely super important. And I mentioned him stopping the run. Really good at stopping the run. So he was asked, and I believe Hondo Carpenter might have asked him, where does that sense of pride come from in your ability to stop the run?
That's what I was coached to do at Alabama, and really in high school. That was something that we always put a lot of emphasis on. When I got to Alabama, that was the first thing we did at practice. Every day we started out with striking the sled and starting out with playing the run, because at Alabama, our first, a job was to attack the blocker, and we had to earn the right to rush the passer. And so for us, that meant stopping them on first and second downs, making negative plays, getting them behind the line of scrimmage, and getting an obvious third down. So where they had to pass the ball. So, man, it's something I've been coached on really, really hard, and it's something I take a lot of pride in.
So there you hear it. He's talking about, hey, that's what he was coached up to do even in high school. So obviously he takes coaching well. Right? Hey, this is what I need you to do. This is what your number one focus has got to be. And it was his number one focus, and he did really well stopping the run, and he wasn't much of a pass rusher at all until 2022. All of a sudden, he had some success getting to the quarterback with 4 sacks, and that was the most sacks he had had in his college career. And again, over 50 games, all of a sudden he had 4 sacks in 2022. So a question was asked to him about that pass rusher ability and the opportunity that he had to do that, because he did say in another interview that, the opportunity to get to the quarterback was there, so he took advantage of it. Well, it was doubled down. They asked him a question about, was it opportunity or was it a light bulb that went off for you in 2022 that helped that success to get to the quarterback. Here's Byron Young on that.
I think it was really, I would probably say it was opportunity, but maybe a little bit of a lie. Because, before this past year, I wasn't taking the bulk of the reps. We had other guys in front of me like LeBron and Ray, Fedarian Mathis, Christian Barmore for those first 3 years that I was there. And so a lot of times I might not have been in on the third downs or the obvious passing situations just because those guys were older and they had already earned that opportunity. But, I got the opportunity, especially later in the year. Coach put me out there and he let me show what I could do. So I think it was a little bit of both.
So going back to some of the conversation I had on the show on Monday about these guys, the draft that the Raiders did, Dave Ziegler and company came up with, I felt like they selected guys that had really good production in school, but they also had room to grow. So it wasn't like they're tapped out, like, okay, that's who that guy is going to be. And, a perfect example is Will Anderson from Alabama. A lot of people believe that you've seen the best of Will Anderson, and he's going to be a solid player, but he's not going to continue to get better, where a guy like Tyree Wilson, they believe, has the opportunity to get better. Well, I believe that Byron Young has the opportunity to get better as a pass rusher as well. He's going to stop the run. Right, that's something that that's how he butters his bread, is by stopping the run. But now that he's had a taste of getting to the quarterback, I feel like he's going to continue to sharpen up his iron and and make sure that he figures out how to continue to get to the quarterback. And you're working with Max Crosby and you're working with Chandler Jones and he'll be working with Tyree Wilson, and those guys can give him a little bit more knowledge even on how to get to the quarterback. I just think that that's a win-win-win situation. So when I look at him, and I know he's just a third-round pick, and a lot of people don't expect a whole lot from him, I do. I think that he's going to be one of those guys that we look back at the end of the year and say, man, that was a really good pick, right? And again, we don't know who that player is going to be. You always look at the first-round pick and say, oh, that guy's going to be, a 5-6-time Pro Bowler, maybe a Hall of Famer. He's going to be this, that, and the other. A lot of times it's not that guy, just like Max Crosby in 2019, a fourth-round pick. All the thing we knew about Max Crosby when he was selected was that John Gruden said he needed to get with Deuce Gruden and gain some weight. Right, get in the locker room, get in the weight room, and gain some weight, get on a nice program, and continue with the motor that he had. But he had production in college. He was just a skinny dude, but he had production in college. If you go back and look at the stats from Max Crosby at Eastern Michigan, he was getting after the quarterback. He just, like I said, he wasn't built the way he is, and his motor, his want to, and his ability to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to get in the weight room, I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to get thicker, and I'm also going to continue to reinvent myself, is why Max Crosby's had so much success. But that came out of the fourth round. I see a guy like Byron Young and look at him and say, you know what, he's scratching the surface. He's had success, he's had the production in college, but he's one of those guys that's going to try to continue to get better, and he's going to push other people to get better around him. So just wanted to do a little highlight on Byron Young. I think he's going to be a player that the Raiders are going to be very proud to have him on the roster, a guy that's going to be able to really help out in the interior of that Raiders defensive line. And, of course, you got Chandler Jones, you got Max Crosby. I'm excited to see Tyree Wilson out there with those two guys, but I also want to see Byron Young thrown into the mix and see how he can get to the quarterback and help collapse the pocket, I should say, as well. So that's all I got for you for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Little highlight on Byron Young, third-round defensive tackle out of Alabama. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. It comes up next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your feedback, your calls and texts, even got a tweet that we're going to get to, but you can hit us up on the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693, on Twitter at your boy Q254. I try to get in as many as possible, get a lot of feedback all the time, but let's go ahead and start off with a tweet. We'll get this one from Josh, a.k.a. North Logan Raider. I don't want him to think that I overlooked this one, so let me go ahead and jump this one. It's a pretty lengthy tweet, but here it goes. Okay. I was very disappointed with the first wide receiver pick, then the quarterback that no one knows about. Plus, this quarterback is basically the same as Derek Carr. So it proves that it wasn't Carr's ability, it was him as a person that McDaniels didn't like. So in my opinion, the two bad picks are the wasted wide receiver pick, we have enough wide receivers, and the quarterback pick that is just a third-string backup. I'm just mad because all the prior bad draft pick over many years and losing seasons over and over. I've been a Raider fan for a long time. I'm just getting tired of losing every season. I'm tired of being the laughingstock of our division and the NFL. Didn't help how we ended last season. So it's like having your heart broken over and over. It's just hard to trust anymore. I can only hope, but even after last season, that's becoming harder to do. Like you say, if we could just win, make it to the playoffs, win the Super Bowl, that'd really help to start changing my mind and restore my trust and hope. Thank you, Q. Appreciate you for putting up with us frustrated Raider fans. That's North Logan Raider, a.k.a. Josh on Twitter. And thanks so much. And I'll tell you this, if the Raiders win the Super Bowl, man, that'll be more than starting to hope or regain trust, right? They win the Super Bowl, man. I mean, that winning the Super Bowl goes a long way. And I'm not saying that they're going to do that. I think that they're going to start building this team up. I think they're going to start building it up in the image that they have. They're going to start having solid draft picks, in solid draft classes, which I think this one was. I don't think it was a grand slam or a home run. I don't think it was bad either. I think it was a very solid draft, which is all you really need to do. You need to have solid drafts year after year after year. Think about this. If you can get Bs every draft class, like you go 5 years in a row and the grade that you come out with your draft is a B, I think you're doing really well. And you have some really good talent in your locker room. Now, again, you want to hit home runs. You want to come out of a draft and be like, man, that was exceptional. But that's not going to happen. That's not realistic to happen all the time. So if you can consistently have Bs and be solid each and every year where you're not coming out of the draft saying, oh, my God, that sucked. What was that? And you mentioned a couple of the draft picks. And, you can criticize the Aiden O'Connell, the fourth-round quarterback out of Purdue. He's a backup. He's going to be a backup. He's a guy that Josh McDaniels is going to like the style he has. He's not mobile, so he's not a quarterback that, I want, but I just know that he's going to be a guy that could be a quality backup. Brian Hoyer is not going to be a backup forever, right? He's not going to stay around forever, and Jimmy G is not going to stay around forever. I believe the Raiders are going to be in the business of drafting a quarterback, if not every year, every other year, until they get their guy, and then they're going to continue to draft guys. So I wouldn't worry about Aiden O'Connell. He had really good numbers at Purdue. Again, he's not my favorite quarterback that I prefer, but Josh McDaniels is saying, and Dave Ziegler is saying that this guy gets it upstairs. He's a very smart dude, so maybe he can help with the room. I mean, get the room up to speed. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that one. And the wide receiver, Trey Tucker out of Cincinnati, the third-round pick. Like I mentioned on Monday's show, a lot of people, including Dane Brugler from The Athletic, had him projected as a fifth-round pick. So they probably could have got him a little bit later, but he does provide a lot of speed, something that the Raiders haven't had really since Henry Ruggs, and we all know how that situation shook out. So maybe he's able to provide that. Maybe you start to see what the idea was in a few days or even a month or so. Who knows who's going to be in that room, that wide receiver room. Right now, there's a ton of wide receivers. I guarantee that's not how it's going to be. So there's going to be some guys that are going to be moved out of there quick, fast, in a hurry. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But, I mean, if you look at it and you look at the overall class, you got Tyree Wilson, you got Michael Mayer, you got Byron Young, who I just highlighted in segment number 2. Jacorian Bennett, the cornerback, I think he's going to be good. Christopher Smith, I think he has an opportunity. Amari Burney, he's a 6th-round pick, safety turned linebacker. I think he has an opportunity to do something. Nesta J. Silvera from Arizona State, I'm not too sure about him. So, we'll see. But, if you come away with, 3 or 4 really good players, 3 or 4 guys that you feel confident that are going to be starters at some point, I think you've done pretty well. So I don't think it's that bad. And again, like I've said all the time, man, you can't blame past years of failures on Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels and Champ Kelly. The only thing that you could blame on them is last year. That's it. That's all they're responsible for and anything moving forward. Right? I mean, that's all you could blame them on. So I get the years of being heartbroken. And look, I'm right there in the same boat with you. I tell the story all the time that, my son, who's going to be a junior in college pretty soon, has really never seen the Raiders good, right? All he's doing is trusting that I know what the hell I'm talking about. And so far throughout his lifetime, I really haven't, because they've been so bad. But that's not Dave Ziegler's fault. That's not Josh McDaniels' fault. That's just the Raiders as an organization have not been good, and that's ton of turnover all the time, different philosophies, all this different change. So you're bound to fail. Right? So for all the people, and I'm not saying you, but for all the people that are like, well, get rid of these guys. They suck. Fire this guy. Fire that guy. Okay, so turn over again. And then come in with a new philosophy. And then what? Then you're back to ground zero. So you might as well wait it out and see how it shakes out. And now that Dave Ziegler and company have their first draft class, their full, complete draft class under their belt, see how it works. So I understand your frustrations. Hang in there. It's going to be a while before any games are played. So there's no reason to be frustrated now, right? And there's plenty of time for frustration during the regular season. You got 17 games guaranteed, and hopefully you get some playoff games as well. But thank you for that tweet, my man. I do appreciate you. Next up, we'll roll with a text from Raider Wade. What up, Q? It's Raider Wade. Hope you enjoyed the draft. I just watched some tape on the Raiders' new rookie quarterback. He looks great. But what's the dirt? Why wasn't this kid a higher draft prospect? I know you'll give us the good, but we also want the bad. We want to know everything you know on him. Have a great one. Go Raiders. That's from Raider Wade. And, I mean, it's real simple when it comes to Aiden O'Connell. He's just not mobile. He's not a mobile guy. He's a gunslinger guy who depends on his arm a lot and believes in his arm a lot, which is a good thing, but then it could be a bad thing because he could look at a window and think, you know what? I got a strong enough arm to get it in there, and then that turns the ball over. I mean, look what he did in 2022. He had 22 interceptions and 22 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. That's not going to cut it. He's got to be able to protect the ball. He's not mobile at all. You know, he'll move just a little bit, but I mean, Derek Carr ran then more than Aiden O'Connell did, so you know he's not going to run. That's part of the issue as well. I know people talk about his quick release, and people are talking about, oh, he looks very Tom Brady-like. I'm not going to put that on him. I'm not going to put that on anybody, right? I mean, you know what Tom Brady's done, his body of work, that speaks for itself. So I'm not going to put that on a fourth-round pick out of Purdue. But again, he's a guy that's very smart. Right, and that's one of the things that Dave Ziegler has talked about when we met with him at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center on Saturday following the draft, is that he's got it between the ears. He really does. The guy is a fighter, right? He was like 9th or 10th on the depth chart. He was a walk-on at Purdue. He started out as a tight end, found his way to the quarterback room, and you know, fought and leapfrogged over guys to the point where he became one of the best quarterbacks in Purdue history as far as stats go. Now, I mean, there's obviously quarterbacks that are more highly talked about coming out of Purdue that aren't named Aiden O'Connell, but he, as far as stats go, he put up some numbers, some big time numbers. So the guy has a lot of perseverance and believes in himself, and he's not a quitter. So we'll see. And again, he's a backup quarterback. That's what I keep going back to. Is at the end of the day, he's a backup quarterback, and if he turns into anything else, great. If he doesn't, well, that's okay too. So thank you so much for that text. I appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider Meatloaf. It's a quick one. He's calling to talk about the fifth-year options on Queen and Simmons not being picked up, something I talked about in segment number 1. Here he is, Raider Meatloaf.
Hey, Q, it's Raider Meatloaf here. What's up, Raider Nation? Just was on Twitter, and it looks like Isaiah Simmons and Patrick Queen, their fifth-year option isn't getting picked up. Now that the draft's over, I think that those would be two players, and Isaiah Simmons being one of them that we talked about a lot while he was in that draft class that could be getting drafted. Want to know your thoughts about continuing to build, you know, just because it's the draft, it's not over. And I think Raider Nation, the people that don't like the draft, need to chill out because we got a lot of building to do too outside of the draft. Just want to know your thoughts, Q. All right, take care.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. You know, the Raiders and Cardinals might look to move those guys. They might. We talked about it in segment number 1. Dave Ziegler, the GM of the Raiders, he could easily pick up the phone and see what they'd want for him, or they might not be looking to move him at all. They might be doing exactly what the Raiders did last year with Josh Jacobs. Decline the fifth-year option. The guaranteed money isn't worth it as far as they're concerned, and see what happens. Maybe those guys turn in and have a great year, and then they have to figure it out afterwards, just like the Raiders are trying to figure it out right now with Josh Jacobs. Guys always ball out in their contract year, right? And now for Isaiah Simmons and for Patrick Queen, it's their contract year. I mean, because they didn't get their fifth-year option picked up, they're going to play this next year for a contract, either with their respective team, the Ravens and the Cardinals, or with one of the other teams across the league. So we'll see what happens. There's many different ways that this thing could play out, but you know, if it's too much, if Dave Ziegler picks up the phone, makes a call, and they say, yeah, we want this, that, and the third, and it's too much, okay, never mind. Thanks, but no thanks. We'll talk to you later, right? The guy's going to be a free agent in a year anyway, so it's not really that big a deal to pick up the phone and just kind of kick the tires and make a decision if they look at those guys and think they'd be a good fit in their defense anyway. So that's something obviously they have to have a conversation with Patrick Graham. So thanks so much for that call, my man. Appreciate you. Next up, I got a text from Logan in Pennsylvania. It says, Q, overall, I like the draft. Came away with probably 4 to 6 starters by 2024. I say that because our first, second, and fifth round picks are probably rotational backups this year. I think by next year, Wilson, Mayer, Young, Bennett, Smith, and Burney could all be starters. No matter what anyone thinks, if you get 6 starters in the draft, that's a huge win. Would have preferred DTR over O'Connell at 170. O'Connell's a career backup. DTR reminds me of a Tyrod Taylor. Potential to develop into a starter. I don't see a path for O'Connell to be anything other than a 2, which is fine at 135. He gave the grades on the players. Tyree Wilson got an A. Michael Mayer, tight end, A. Byron Young out of Alabama, who I highlighted in segment 2, he gave him a B minus. No, he gave him an A. Or no, he gave him a B. I'm sorry. He gave him one of those scores, right? No, he gave him a B. Trey Tucker, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati, gave him a C. Jacorian Bennett, cornerback out of Maryland, gave him a C. Quarterback Aiden O'Connell, a C. Christopher Smith, the safety out of Georgia, A. Amari Burney, linebacker out of Florida, a C. And Nesta J. Silvera, a B. He said overall grade is a B. Solid draft. Crushed the first 2 picks. Refreshing. Again, Logan in Pennsylvania, thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you, my man. And, Yeah, I don't know, man. 6 starters is a lot. If you get 6 starters in a couple years out of a draft class, that's a great draft class, right? That's way more than solid. I think it's solid. I think Tyree Wilson, you're going to see him play a lot this year. Michael Mayer is going to be a starter day one. There's no doubt. I mentioned Byron Young in segment number 2. I think you're going to see a lot of him. Trey Tucker is going to be interesting to see what happens with him in that wide receiver room. Jacorian Bennett, I think he's going to be a starter at some point this season, not right away. I think Christopher Smith is going to find a way to be a starter at some point this season, not right away. Aiden O'Connell, I agree with you 100% on the career backup. It's just who he is. Bernie is kind of an interesting person, the linebacker out of Florida. You know, he turned 1 year of linebacker play in. That was it. He was a safety before that, and then he turned linebacker. So you'll see what he does and see how he challenges in that linebacker room and see if there's any additions made to that linebacker room, because there very well could be. Nesta J. Silvera, I'm not real high on him. We'll see what happens. You gave him a B. We'll see what happens with him. I've heard that he's kind of a knucklehead and gets a little loose at times. So we'll see if he's able to get along with Josh McDaniels and Patrick Graham and the Raiders coaching staff, because really they don't need anybody that's going out there and not being in the moment and knowing situational football. And it's kind of, like I said, a little bit of a knucklehead. It's not at the time. It's got knucklehead tendencies. So I'm not really too big a fan on him, but I'll do a little bit deep dive in and see what I can learn about him. He went to Miami at first, so it was like 3 years at Miami and then 1 year at Arizona State. So we'll see what's up with that. So there you go. That's all I got for you for today's show. Tomorrow we'll have a call from James in San Diego, a text from Southern Indiana Raider, Tyler in Nashville. Hit us up with a call. Plus we'll have more news and notes. Probably highlight another player. Not too sure which one yet, but find a player to highlight on tomorrow's show. And we'll continue to bring the heat for you each and every day here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Today I'm supposed to be in the Raiders facility doing the little Raider Roundtable show with JT the Brick. And I think Rhett Lewis is going to join us as well from the NFL Network just to kind of recap the draft. So that should be pretty cool. I'll tell you about the highlights from that if there's something good, some good stuff that comes from that. But if not, Raider Nation, then we'll be back at it tomorrow here on the Locked On Raiders podcast doing what we do. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.